Today's video will be building my personal Ultimate 386 build.
We review old technology from games to old PCs, and don't forget the toys. Don't get ancient electronics. We cover it all.
So in doing this video, I had a lot of debate in my head on what to name it. Using something like the Ultimate 386, it can be a little clickbaity. This isn't, even though I'm calling it my Ultimate 386 build, keep in mind my Ultimate 386 build in there. This is not going to be everyone's Ultimate 386 build, and it's certainly, as far as speed and power go, not the most powerful or speediest 386, but it is the one I think that works best for me, and that's what's ultimate for me. I wanted something that's kind of all around a good 386 build. I wanted something that balanced aesthetics from that early 90s, late 80s era for the 386. So aesthetics is important, not the most important category for me, but the aesthetics and the parts do matter in that sense. I wanted something powerful, but not too powerful, because the other part of this equation is compatibility. And sometimes when you put in the fastest parts, like the fastest CPU or things like that, it creates incompatibility with games that came out in that era. So you don't necessarily always want the fastest parts. You don't always want the fastest 386. So you have to take compatibility in mind, and that's what I did with this. So that's usually the three criteria I look at when I do these builds: aesthetics, power, and compatibility. So that's what I've tried to balance here, probably with a little bit of a skew towards compatibility. That's usually what I kind of emphasize the most, and then with power coming in second, and then aesthetics last. So this is the case I've decided to go with for my 386 build. I'm actually fine with this smaller tower form factor. I should be able to get everything I need in it. And I do like this particular tower. Aesthetically, it feels a little bit off. I know it's strange and it's kind of nitpicky, but certain eras of computing, they did have a certain case aesthetic, and for me this feels more 486, early Pentium era. Like, I don't know, just the roundedness. It's very... I know it's being very picky, but this does feel to me a little more early Pentium, late 486 than it does 386, but it still works. It's just not exactly the aesthetics I would have preferred. I'll probably end up... I haven't tested these drives yet. This one looks older. I don't even know. This might be a 720K floppy drive. I'll have to test these drives yet. The floppy drives on this are a little bit interesting too, not necessarily in how they function, but just their aesthetics and their design. These came with this machine at least when I got this case. These were already installed, and they're just a little bit different. For instance, this one right here, the 1.44 megabyte drive, it's like a little bit more rounded than usual. It just looks slightly different. And then this one up here, the 1.2 megabyte drive, it just, again, it's like rounded here and here, and then even this little handle thing is a little bit, just the design of it is a little bit different when you compare it to most of the ones I have. Again, it doesn't seem to affect functionality. It's purely like a looks and a design kind of thing. I will probably replace this CD-ROM drive with something else that doesn't have, rewritable, writable disk, so prominently on the front. Something that's a little bit more plain will probably work, or it looks older. And I actually do have a few genuinely older drives. I have like a 4x drive, and then I have a couple caddy drives. I think one of those might be IDE. I'm not going SCSI with this machine. So those might work, but I'm probably going to use this build fairly heavily, so I do want more reliable parts. So I'll probably just go with a more modern CD drive that's just a little bit more nondescript, not so much like labeling on it, so it kind of looks the part a little bit better. I've decided to keep this CD-ROM drive because it does seem to work, but I wanted to try something different. Instead of using sandpaper and like sanding off the CDR writable rewritable label, I just kind of put this sticker over it. This is from Geek and Spiel. This is, it kind of makes it look like an old multimedia PC, like CD-ROM. It was a quick fix. I know the colors don't quite match. Well, they don't match at all, so it looks a little bit odd, but I don't know. It might be a good option for someone that doesn't want to like sand off the markings or labelings on their drive. So I'm just going to stick it on there for now and see how it works out. We have this big round power button here, and that works fine. Obviously, what I do really like about this case is it does have an LED display right there, so we can prominently display our 386 CPU speed, so I do like that. And it has a turbo button here. This reset button, though, it is locked. Like, it does not move, so something's jamming it up. I'm going to have to take off this faceplate, take a look at that. It's just not moving at all. So something's gumming that reset button up. JVT system, I'll probably put a little replacement badge there at some point. I can see a lot of like a dirt in here and these little grooves here for this grill. I'll try to clean that out as best I can. But yeah, this case works for me. I like the size. I love the LED display. It has what I need. It's just, as far as aesthetics go, like I said, I just would have wished for something a little more 386-ish. Alright, so I've removed this faceplate here, and I did a little cleaning behind there, and I was looking at it, trying to figure out a way to maybe fix this button, and I couldn't really figure it out. And then I realized that I'm stupid, and it doesn't look like it. It blends in really well, but this is like a button within a button, so the little middle there is actually a button. Sometimes it's a little annoying, because if you really want to reset, you have to get like a pin or a screwdriver or something to make it work. So sometimes it is annoying. I've never accidentally hit a reset button, so to me it's annoying, but I see why they did it. But anyways, yeah, that's really good. I didn't even notice. I just thought it was all part of the button. But okay, anyways, well, that's one problem. Well, hopefully solved. I haven't actually tested this button, but everything looks good as far as the wiring on the back goes, so it should function properly. So let's talk about the CPU. And the CPU I want to put into this 386, I actually put a lot of thought into the CPU. So right here, this is an Intel 386DX 33 megahertz. On a 386, the DX means it's 32-bit. If it's SX, it's 16-bit. So 32-bit's going to be a little faster. It accesses the memory a little faster. At least that's my understanding of it. And the thing with the 386 or the 386 era or 386 class machines, there's actually a lot of software and games, especially from that time, that actually sort of fit into the 386 speed class fairly well as far as speed sensitivity. What I mean by that is there are a number of software titles out there for vintage computers that are very speed sensitive. And a lot of them, as I said, tend to fall into this 386 range. So if you go onto the internet, you can look up, there's like a Vogan's wiki, and there's a list of speed sensitive old retro computer games. And a lot of them, if you look on there, you'll see a lot of them, you don't want to use something faster than, say, a 33 megahertz 386. There's also a lot on there, probably even more so, games listed that you don't want anything faster than a 25 or 20 megahertz 386. So this got me thinking a lot about what CPU I wanted to use. And of course, if there's more that have issues with anything above 25 megahertz, you'd think you'd want to put in a 25 megahertz 386. And I gave this a lot of thought, and in the end I kind of decided that it's easier to slow down a CPU than speed up a CPU. So my machine does have a turbo button, so my thinking is with a 33 megahertz 386, so it kind of gives me a wider range overall of games I can play. And for those games that don't want anything above a 20 or 25 megahertz 386, I'm hoping I can just hit the turbo button and that should solve the problem. I'm not sure what kind of speed the turbo button will take this down to. I hope it's not too much. I hope it doesn't make it too slow. But hopefully it will also allow those games that have speed issues to work correctly. So For instance, we'll go with the most famous one, Wing Commander, and that's a weird one because there actually isn't a perfect CPU for that game. With something like this, the 33 megahertz CPU, the beginning parts of the game may run a little too fast, but when you get to the end parts of the game where you have a lot of asteroids and other ships that are on screen at the same time, you want something with a little bit more power because on a 25 or 20 megahertz 386, the end parts of the game may run too slow. So it's a weird kind of balancing act there if you want the beginning or the end to be a little bit slower, but again, my thinking is at the beginning of a game like Wing Commander, I can have the turbo button on or off depending. It will be deturboed, and hopefully it will run okay, and then when you get near the end of the game where you need a little bit more power, I can hit the turbo button and it will speed it back up to 33 megahertz and it should play better, get a better frame rate, I'm hoping. And then for games like Test Drive 3, where it may play a little bit too fast on this 33 megahertz 386, I'm hoping the turbo button will sort of solve that issue as well. So that's what my thinking is for using this Intel 386DX 33 megahertz. If it doesn't work out, I can always put in a 20 or a 25 megahertz 386. But other than that, I think the 33 megahertz 386 is kind of a good fit. It's kind of, I don't know what the quintessential 386 is, but I think it slots in very nicely speed-wise. Of course, probably the AMD 40 megahertz 386 is sort of one of the most well-known or sort of the most famous 386, but again, when you're getting into those speeds, it's almost like you may as well just get a 486, even if it's a slower one. I don't know. So, I don't know, that's just my thinking, so we'll put this guy in and we'll see how it works. Alright, so let's talk about math coprocessors. So here's one right here. This is a ULSI math coprocessor. Now, admittedly, when you're doing anything earlier, say pre-486 era, math coprocessor is not going to get a lot of use. It's good for things like CAD or certain games that actually take advantage of it, but generally the math coprocessor doesn't do a whole lot in a lot of these vintage systems, especially if we're talking about 8088 up to the 486. There are a handful of games that can take advantage of the math coprocessor, SimCity for example, but in general it doesn't really come into much use. But I like putting them in anyways because I like, filling up all the sockets, making high-end builds. If you're going to make a high-end build, you're going to need the math coprocessor. Now, you would think you would want the Intel math coprocessor, but interestingly, the Intel 387 math coprocessors tend to be the slowest. They do have a neat feature where I believe they can run asynchronous with the main CPU. I think I'm saying that right, which means it can run at a different speed than your main CPU. For example, if you have a 33 MHz 386 and you put in a Intel 387, it doesn't have to run at 33 megahertz. I believe it could run like slower or faster. Probably not fast. Well, it could run, say, slower if you needed it to. But with these CPUs, they tend to run at the same speed, whatever speed you have your main processor running at. It's not really a big issue for most people. But the thing is, with these non-Intel 387 CPUs, they tend to run a little bit better, a little bit faster. And of all the math coprocessors, there's one that actually runs the best overall, and it's not this guy. It would be the offerings from Cyrix. So the Cyrix Fast Math 387 processors, at least from all the testing I've seen, seem to run the fastest for whatever reason. So that's why I'm going to put in this Cyrix Fast Math, not Fast Math, there's no T there, so Fast Math. CX83D87, 33 megahertz, rated for 33 megahertz. So this is the guy that will be running alongside our 33 megahertz 386. Again, probably not going to get much use, but let's throw it in there because we can. And this is the 386 board I am going with for this project. I recently acquired this board in a small lot. Actually, I acquired this board the same time I acquired the 286 motherboard that I used in my previous 286 build that I've recently put together. And this is the FX3000, this is revision 1.0, and this is a hybrid board. So with hybrid board, what I mean is it supports both 386 and 486 processors. I'm not 100% sure if this supports the later 486s. It might just support the non-clock doubled, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But it does support 386 and 486 processors. And with these hybrid boards, we do get the benefit of it is a mature board for something that supports a 386. It's very integrated. Like the 286, you will find older 386 boards that are much bigger and just are covered in chips. This one is obviously pretty integrated into not as many chips. It also has the benefit of allowing us to have cache, L2 cache, or in the case of the 386, that will be L1 cache. We'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, I do like this board, not just for the size and integration, but it is known to be fairly speedy. There's a couple other YouTubers that have reviewed this board and used this board, and they tend to like it. It tends to work pretty well. I've already installed our CPUs. Here's our 33 megahertz 386 and the Cyrix FastMath coprocessor. If you'll notice, this slot is much bigger. There's pins for a much larger CPU. If you were using this in 46 mode, there's a jumper over here you change, and so basically in that case, the 46 would go here. Obviously, you'd remove the 387, and you'd put a 46 here, change the jumper, and it should theoretically work in 46 mode then. I believe this board supports the fastest 386s, so it does support the 40 megahertz 386. It should also support the 386 to 46 upgrade processors, and then like I said before, it should support at least early 46 CPUs. You have your AT keyboard connector, we have your AT power supply. Funny thing is, I just noticed I don't see a spot where a battery would go, like where there was a barrel battery, but I believe there's a connector over here somewhere for an external battery connector. It might be here, but maybe it's hiding over here. I'll have to look, but you can connect an external battery connector. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 16-bit ISA slots. For this build, we shouldn't need any more than that. You'll notice there's a little like solder point here. I don't know, solder point or place where you could add a little extension here. A lot of people think that you can add VLB to this, that this was like a VESA local bus slot. I don't believe this was meant to be what we know as like the standard VESA local bus. I believe this was for kind of a semi-proprietary, proprietary sort of local bus connection. So if you did solder on this part right here and you threw in like your standard VLB card, I do not believe it would work. I believe it's just for very specific local bus kind of card here. So most of these boards I've seen don't even have this. I have seen a couple that have this part connected, but like I said, you need a very specific card to work in this. And no, I have no idea what the performance would be like. So right here we have the crystal oscillator. This is for the 386, so whatever number is on this, you have it, and that's the speed your CPU is going to work with. So right now it is a 66 megahertz crystal, so we have the CPU running at 33 megahertz. If you want to say put in a 40 megahertz 386, you're going to have to change this, and it will be a 40 megahertz crystal oscillator. Here is the memory, standard 30-pin RAM. Right now I have 16 megabytes. That's what I want to go with the 386. Some people might say that's overkill. I think this board supports up to 64 megabytes. So 16 is kind of right in the middle. I think a 16 megabytes is kind of like high-end for a 386 build, so I think I'm good with that. It shouldn't give us any problems. I don't think it's too much for a 386, but I don't know. I think it strikes a good middle ground for like if you're building a high-end 386, 16 megabytes. Should be more memory than we'd ever need for this kind of build. If you're making a build like this for yourself, feel free to use less if it tickles your fancy. And then over here, we have the UMC chipset here and here. And as we talked about before, we have the L2 cache. Now, right now I have this thing maxed out at 256K of cache. Now for a 486, that's kind of like the golden standard. For a 386 where you might not even have cache on the board, this is probably way overkill. So I know for the 16 megabytes of RAM, we would need, I believe, 64K of L2 cache, and that should cache all the RAM. So with this full amount, I don't know, it's probably not hurting our performance, but yeah, the cache is overkill, but this is what was on it, so we'll just go with it, 256. Now, like I said before, there is no cache on the 386. There is 0 on here, so this would end up being L1 cache. So if we had a 486 here, or one of those 386 to 486 upgrade processors, those CPUs have L1 cache built into them, and in that case this would work as L2 cache. But with a 386, this kind of works as L1 cache. Slower than if it was on the CPU, but it's there, and it will boost performance, most likely significantly. Now with this cache, you may have noticed I had two different speeds on here. There are 20 nanosecond and 15 nanosecond. That's just what this came with, and I don't have any replacement cache at the moment to make them all one speed, but it seems to work fine. I believe it's working at the lowest speed, so it's all functioning as 20 nanosecond cache. Maybe in the future I will upgrade all of these to 15 nanosecond. And that's about it. All in all, I do like this board. It is fairly integrated and small, and it should work well in the build I'm trying to put together. For sound cards, I'm going to go with the venerable Sound Blaster Pro 2. This probably shouldn't be any surprise. This is a really good sound card for 386 and 486 systems. It fits the era, more or less, for the build I'm making. Of course, it supports Sound Blaster Sound and AdLib. It's a pretty decent card. Also, the joystick port here is not MPU compatible, so you cannot hook up an external MIDI device, so that's not a problem. I will be adding a MIDI card as well, but yeah, this is an all-around decent card. It sounds good, very high compatibility. Of course, there's other cards you could use, but the Pro is usually my go-to for 386 systems, and even to a large degree for 486 systems. Although when you do get into the 486 era, in my opinion, Sound Blaster 16s are also quite a viable route for sound cards if you want to stick with the creative route. Generally, they're just kind of the easiest to set up and the most compatible. Not necessarily the best sounding, although the Sound Blaster Pro 2 is pretty clean sounding. I like the sound. Does digital effects as well. Just a good all-around sound card for a 386. And then right here it does have a connector for the speaker. And if we look here, of course, we have the joystick port that I pointed out earlier. It is not MPU compatible. We have, well, these are not labeled, but we have a volume control right here. I believe one of these is a mic line in and line out. Or maybe this is line out and one of these is line in. Here is the MIDI card I'll be using for this build. It's a PC MIDI card from Music Quest. This is fully like Roland MPU compatible. It also supports intelligent mode. So I should have no problem with things like the MT32 if I wanted to hook one of those up to it. With being a 386, the MT32 external MIDI device will probably see some usage on this machine. This particular card is also compatible with Wing Commander. There are some MIDI devices where Wing Commander will lock up at the beginning, and I believe even certain revisions of this Music Quest card. I believe it's been a while, but I think you have to pay attention to the BIOS or the ROM revision. This one does, I have confirmed this one does work though, but yours might not, depending on the revision. You also have this little connector here. So there's the connector. You would hook this up to it, and then these would go to your MIDI device. I had this cable custom made some time ago, and it has worked quite well for me. So yeah, that should cover our sound. We have a really good sound card for AdLib, Sound Blaster, digital sound effects, and then this guy here will let us use external MIDI devices. So we're set for sound. Let's take a look at our options for video card. Well, it shouldn't be anyone's surprise that my possible pick for this build is this card based off the ET4000 from Sang Labs. This is kind of the de facto ISA card that people use in their 386, simply because it's known to be fairly compatible and also the fastest, or one of the fastest 16-bit ISA VGA cards. Not 100% sure on the RAM here. It's either 512 or 1 megabyte. We'll see once it's installed. But yeah, this is generally seen as a very fast ISA card. As far as compatibility, I can say I have had a few issues with these cards in the past, specifically the VLB version of this card, and I usually bring this up every time I have this card, whether the VLB or the ISA version. And that is in certain games. For instance, Ultima 7, I had strange ripple effects at the top. It kind of almost looked like VCR tracking errors. And there was another game that the same issue came up. Now that was with the VLB version of this card. Maybe it was an issue restricted to that specific card, or perhaps the VLB version. I should probably one of these days actually test that with the ISA version. But from my personal experience, compatibility with these is very good, but not quite perfect. But they are quite fast. That said, I have another card that I'm considering using. So this is my second possible choice here. This card is the graphics chip anyways is from WDC. It's the WD90C31/LR. For the memory, again, I'm not 100% sure. It's either 1 megabyte, but more likely it's 512 megabytes. Now, this card came up a few months ago. There's another YouTuber that covers vintage computer equipment, High Treason, and he had this card in his large 1980s 386 build. It was a fairly slow 386 SX 16 megahertz. And his commenting on this card was, he felt it was reliable, but it was quite slow. Now, I agree with the reliable part. I've never had any issues with this card, or at least this particular chipset here on this card. But as far as speed goes, interestingly, I did a speed kind of benchmark test several months back where I pitted my fastest ISA cards up against each other. And this card consistently came out as fast, or in some cases faster, than the ET4000. And I tried it in several machines. I tried it in a 40 megahertz 386, and even in a machine with it was either 133 megahertz or 160 megahertz AMD 5X86. And the results were the same. This card was quite competitive and just as fast as the ET4000 in many instances. I think there were a few benchmarks where it was slightly slower and some where it was slightly faster, but it was definitely head-to-head with the ET4000. Now, there are differences between this specific card and the one that High Treason has, but they seem to be fairly minor. Mine has things like this this printing on the side, 1992 WDC. His lacks that. Mine has this crystal oscillator. His lacks that. These ROM chips are also different. Mine have a date code of 92 WDC. His are quite different. There's also some differences in the jumpers. His does not have this jumper right here. So I'm not sure. His just might be an older revision that's a little bit slower. Perhaps the ROMs here are making it slower. Maybe his configuration is adding wait states that mine isn't. For instance, I noticed on his, he has this jumper here, but it is open, whereas mine's closed. And his settings for the switches were a little bit different too. So maybe his is configured and it's just slower because of his configuration. But as far as I can tell, this is just as fast and just as compatible as the ET4000, maybe even more so. But I am doubting myself, because if that was the case, people would be talking about this card all the time. And well, no one talks about this card. It's always the ET4000. So I'm not ready to call it a hidden gem or anything like that. But we're going to benchmark it again today, and we'll see how it fares in my 386DX33 megahertz. I'm not going to do a ton of benchmarks, but we'll do, the typical suspects. We'll do Doom and PCP Player and things like that, and we'll see if this is still coming up just as fast as the ET4000. I'll also say the ET4000 ISA card that we looked at earlier, it is a different ET4000 than the one I benchmarked this against in my previous tests. So So that will roll out the fact of maybe that other ET4000 card has issues that's slowing it down. So we'll see. Alright, here we are. Everything is installed. I know this machine is working. I have used a hard drive here. This is a Olympic medalist. I forget who makes this hard drive. It's 10 gigabytes. Of course, we're only seeing 2 gigabytes on it, but it seems to work well enough. I went with DOS 6 this time. DOS 5 would have been appropriate, maybe even slightly more period appropriate, but just DOS 6 is just easier to work with in this case. I put DOS 5 on my 286. I'm fine with DOS 6.22 on this guy. I found another one of these EIDE controllers. You can't see it here, but it is an EIDE controller, I think from Promise, and I really like these things. I know I tout myself as a bit of a purist, and I try to make things kind of period correct, but I'll make concessions now and then for convenience. And even though this card's from like 95, so it's a few years past the date of most of the cards and parts of this machine, it looks the part. You wouldn't tell that it's out of place by glancing at it, and it's just very convenient. These cards seem to be pretty convenient. They detect the drives with less issues than some of the older I/O cards, and it generally just lets you use, say, if you're using DOS, lets you use the full 2 gigabytes without having to use any kind of software or overlay program. So I like them, and they're convenient, and they, again, if you look in this case, you wouldn't know that this was like not period correct with the rest of the stuff. Not that I'm going strictly period correct with this build, but just saying. Alright, so everything is kind of working. I'm going to hook it up, load some basic drivers and stuff, and then first thing I think we'll do is we're going to benchmark this ET4000, and I'll benchmark the WDC card, and then we'll see. And I just got this badge during editing here, so you might not see it on the computer later in the video, but again, I got this cool 386DX case badge from Geekenspiel. He has a web page. You can also find him, his store on eBay. I just like these badges. They add a little bit of flair, and I like how they look. And also, you know, because I have a million computers and I'm getting old, it actually helps me remember what is actually in this computer. So in the future, I can look at this thing like, oh yeah, that's my 386. It sounds silly, but believe me, it gets to be a problem when you have a ton of computers. And moving on to a few benchmarks here, and yeah, the WDC card dominates here. I just noticed, looking at this chart, I didn't put the legend or the key, but the blue is the ET4000 and the red is the WDC card. And as you can see, in actually all 4 of these, the WDC card is a little bit faster. Now, it is less than 1 FPS or 1 mark in every single test. I don't think a normal human being would be able to tell the difference, but that doesn't change the fact that the WDC card is just as fast, and actually in these tests a smidge faster than ET4000. So I don't know, at this point I have extensively tested this WDC card in 3 separate machines against 2 separate ET4000 ISA cards, and it pretty much always comes up on top or equal to. So I don't know, it seems like this card is a winner to me. It seems just as good or faster than ET4000. I don't know why people don't talk about this card. Maybe I have a special version with faster memory chips or something. I don't know. But this is the card I'm going to be going with because, yeah, it does seem to be, in all my tests, it just seems to be faster than the ET4000. So let me show one more graph here. I did some more tests other than this one. So I also went in, I ran Landmark 6.0, and it does like a video card. It tests the speed of the video card. It does it by characters per millisecond, I think. And again, the WDC card, it came out a little bit faster, maybe what, like 1,000, or not, yeah, like 1,000 characters per millisecond faster, according to these landmark tests. The landmark tests use some weird, like, AT metric. I don't know. It's bizarre. I don't really understand. A lot of these benchmark tests use, like, different methods. But, again, it's, regardless of their weird methods for doing things, the WDC card is coming up faster than the ET4000. And again, in Check It 3.0, you can test the video speed of your video card. And it has 2 categories, BIOS video speed and direct video speed. And in both of those, the WDC card comes out a little bit on top. Now remember, it's just a little bit. It's not like blazingly faster. And again, I don't think like a normal person playing could tell the difference, but it is a little faster. So yeah, I'm just going to go with this WDC card because I like it. It seems to be a little faster. It's just something different. Because like the ET4000 is like the standard, the de facto fast 16-bit ISA card that everyone puts in their machine. So it's nice to find something a little different every once in a while. So I'll go with the WDC card. I'll let you guys know in like later videos if I end up finding something weird about it, or if it's like it has compatibility issues that I haven't run across so far. But it seems to be a winner so far. Don't take this the wrong way about the ED4000. It is still an excellent 16-bit ISA card. It's just there are other cards that can compete with it, so there are options. All right, so let's move on now. Let's take a closer look at this machine and look at some games. All right, so here's our post screen. You'll notice the Seng's Lab. This is an early capture I did of the post. When I had the ET4000 installed. So all the gameplay footage later, that is going to be with the WDC card installed, since that's the card I decided to go with here. So here's the benchmark and check it. I don't know why I didn't do a direct capture of this and instead just pointed the camera at the screen. But anyways, as we can see here, the CPU is detected running at 33 megahertz, so that's good. So let us hit the, and the FPU is also working fine. So let's try hitting the turbo button and see what we get. And with the turbo button engaged, it looks like it cuts the CPU speed in half, and we're getting 16 megahertz. Actually, if we're going to round, it's 17 megahertz, but it's 16 megahertz. And then let's finish up looking at CPU speed here with good old Top Bench, and we'll see what kind of rating it gives us. I suspect it'll be higher than what we're seeing. Yeah, okay, so here is without the turbo. This is at the full 33 megahertz. And it looks like it's seeing it as 80 score of 81. What is the comparative down here? It looks like it's saying a 46 at 25 megahertz. More closely matches a 386DX at 40 megahertz. And that's kind of what I thought. I figured with the faster components like the faster video card and the L1 cache, it's going to bump our speed up. So it is acting more like a DX40. And now here's with the turbo, it does sort of cut the speed in half. It goes to 44. And here it just tells us what is the comparative. That means nothing to me. A Dell 310A, Philips 386, I don't know what those are, but if we go down a bit, it says Intel 286 at 16 megahertz. It's kind of interesting. So yeah, I don't know. This isn't really doing a good job right here telling us what it is in the non-turbo state, but I assume it's a little bit faster than like a standard, bog standard 16 megahertz 386 DX. With everything, it's probably maybe running more like a 20 megahertz DX. I'm not sure. So we'll just have to play a couple games and just see how it runs and then kind of go from there. But I want to do one last thing before we get into games, and I wanted to double check the cache. It seems like the cache is working too. It says this machine seems to have one cache. That is correct. It is only the cache on board. It does see cache is 256K. Gives some speeds for it. Then it says it looks like megabyte 16 isn't being cached. I'm not sure what that means. I've seen errors similar to that before. I'm not exactly sure what that entails. And then we have main memory speed, etc. So, and then cache enabled. So it does look like the L1 cache, in this case of this board, is being detected and is functional. So the first game I wanted to test is Test Drive 3. I don't have much experience at all with this game, but I believe from the Wikipedia on speed-sensitive games, it says, I think it's either a 20 or 25 megahertz 386 that this game prefers. Anything else, and it just runs too fast. A 46 for sure, it runs too fast, and I'm pretty sure it's going to run too fast at our 33 megahertz DX, which is acting like a 40 megahertz DX, so I'm pretty sure it's going to run too fast. Here's a screen here with the car rotating. And I think I hit the turbo button a few times just to see if it... Yeah, so right there is me hitting the turbo button, or D-turbo, and you can see the rotation of the car slowed down significantly. Very noticeable difference there in speed between the 33 megahertz and 16 megahertz. And there you can tell pretty easily that I re-engaged the 33 megahertz, and again the car spinning, and there slowed it down again. So let's get into some actual driving. Keep in mind, I have very little experience with this game. I'm not good with driving games in general, so some of it could be, you know, some of the poor gameplay could be attributed to my poor skills at these type of games. So here we are running the game at 33 megahertz, and I can tell pretty quickly that it's just running too fast. It's just very hard to control. Just everything's running I hesitate because it almost feels like it's just like, oh, it's like this game's emphasizing speed, and it's like it's fast, and it almost can, maybe you can trick yourself into thinking it's supposed to be this fast at this speed, but it is too fast. It's just almost, it's like unplayable in a way. So let's see how it plays when we kick the speed. Well, I'll show a little bit more footage, and then we'll kick the speed down and see how it runs. And here we are running in the 16 megahertz mode, and it feels much more manageable in this mode. I don't know if this is the ideal speed for this game, if it's still running a little too fast or a little too slow. I don't have enough experience with this game to tell, but it does feel much better running at the 16 megahertz. Just a lot more controllable. It just feels a lot... dived right into that police car. But it just feels a lot better at this speed. More correct, for sure. And then, of course, we have one of the poster children for CPU speed-sensitive games. We have the original Wing Commander, which is a well-known game for being very speed-sensitive and maybe not even having an ideal CPU. It's generally recommended that maybe you use like a 20 megahertz 386DX is kind of the recommended, but again, it's one of those games where the beginning... there's not a lot going on, so you want a slower CPU, but then later in the game there's more going on, so you want a faster CPU. So like one CPU at one speed doesn't usually isn't optimal for this entire game, so it can be a little frustrating. And if you watch this segment here, you can see the meteors in the background. Maybe asteroids is the correct term. They're speeding up and slowing down. That's me playing with the turbo button, and that's just to show you the difference that the CPU speed makes on this game. So, like later on in the game, apparently I've never played this game very long into it, but I guess at the end there's a lot more asteroids and ships on screen, so you want a slightly faster CPU. But I don't know if there's a single CPU that will run all of this game well. I guess the ideal measure would be have at least what I'm going for here is to have a slightly faster CPU, and then you're able to like deturbo it and run it slower near the beginning of the game, and then maybe near the end speed it up. But I don't know. I still think maybe my setup's a little bit too fast, even for the end parts of this game. But I don't know. Let's do some basic looking here on how the speed affects it. And I'm just playing the little flight simulator part at the beginning of the game. So I know this isn't like an in-depth look at the speed sensitivity, but it should give us some general ideas. So let's first take a look at the game at the full 33 megahertz. And I can tell pretty much immediately running at the 33 megahertz that it's just running too fast. And I knew this would be the case. It's very hard to do anything. It's very hard to hit the ship because it's just moving too fast. And just at this speed, just everything is just moving too fast for the gameplay experience. And hitting that turbo button to take it down to 16 megahertz, I could tell right away the difference. It makes the game much more playable. I'm actually able to defeat the first ship pretty easily, where I couldn't even really hit it when it was running at 33 megahertz. So it's just a much better experience. It almost feels like maybe it's running too slow. I don't know. Maybe you guys that have more experience with the gameplay in this game can tell me what you think. It definitely makes flying the ship more manageable at 16 megahertz. But again, it maybe feels a little bit too slow. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Now, I do have another option for this machine, and that is I can go into the BIOS and actually disable the cache. Now, disabling the cache on this machine, the external cache is acting as L1 cache, so disabling that should bring the CPUs pretty much down to their normal speeds of 33 megahertz, because we have a 33 megahertz almost kind of achieving a 40 megahertz-ish speed, and we have a 16 megahertz 386 that, with the cache, is probably acting like a little bit faster of a CPU. I don't think this will help Wing Commander, though, just because, well, a 33 megahertz DX is still too fast, and a 16 megahertz DX is probably not fast enough. So I don't think doing this is really going to help the game out. It looks like so far probably our 16 megahertz DX with the L1 cache enabled seems to be our best speed setting for this game, but we'll give it a shot anyways and see what what the game looks like without the L1 cache. But I don't know. It might be optimal for this game. If this game is very important for you, it might be optimal just to put in a 25 megahertz 386DX or a 20 megahertz 386DX. Maybe just the optimal CPUs. But again, I haven't played through the game with this specific machine and messing around with the turbo for different parts of the game. So I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's just my thinking. Alright, so yeah, I've got the check it here. I was just comparing speeds with and without the L1 cache enabled, and you can as well. But let's just go into Wing Commander and let's see how these new let's see how the game runs without the cache. And before we finish off with Wing Commander here, let's take a quick look at the intro, show off some of the MIDI chops of this build. And first let's show the intro with Sound Blaster, and then we'll show the intro with my MT32 running through my MIDI card, which again, it will lock up on certain revisions of certain cards, but it seems to work just fine on that one. So let's take a listen to that. So the next game I want to take a look at was The Legacy Realm of Terror, kind of like a first-person action-adventure RPG. I haven't really played it much. accept testing it here. And the issue I ran into here was kind of a sound issue. Now, the game supports both my Sound Blaster Pro and the Roland MT32, and a option for Roland Sound Blaster combo. Unfortunately, I had some issues. When I picked Sound Blaster, the game played fine. I got all the music and the digital sound effects. When I picked a Roland MT32, of course I got the Roland MT32 music, but no digital sound effects. And once I got into the game, it was completely dead silent. The problem is when I picked the combo, which you would think would be the combo, it would play the Roland music in the intro, and then the game would lock up, just completely lock up. Now, I didn't play around too much with finding a solution, but yeah, this was a issue. Although, for me, it didn't really bother me too much because I actually prefer the Sound Blaster. Of course, you don't get the high-quality Roland MIDI tunes, but I don't know. I thought the Sound Blaster sounded pretty good. I like the digital effects, obviously, but it actually kind of had a weird, twangy sort of, I don't know. The Sound Blaster just sounded appropriate for this game, appropriately kind of creepy. So sorry if you hear these noises outside. There's people doing construction next door, but yeah, and here's the game freezing up. So what we're gonna do now, let's just look at the game with the Sound Blaster in Sound Blaster Pro mode.
Intruder! Medic! Dog! Intruder! Medic! Intruder! Medic! Intruder! Medic! You're dead.
Be the same, Captain. The computer estimates the Enterprise's warp drives have overloaded and explosive.
It's just a simulation, Scott.
Captain Patterson says better luck next time, sir.
We're off course, Captain.
Instruments indicate that we have crossed the Klingon neutral zone. Klingon ship is arming its weapons systems and raising shields.
Damage control standing by, sir.
Message from the Klingon commander, sir.
On screen, Lieutenant.
Enterprise, you are in violation of Klingon space. Your ship is forfeit. Prepare to die.
Our weapons are offline.
The Enterprise has been destroyed. Load a previously saved game.
So that is my 386 build, sort of a high-end 386, I guess I would say. It turned out a little bit, maybe a little bit faster than I would have liked, but I think that's easily fixable. Disabling the cache in the BIOS seems to bring things down to a normal 33 megahertz. I do wish the turbo, or when I deturbo it, I kind of wish it didn't cut it in half. It didn't take it down so far in the speed, but it seems to work. I don't know. I'm still juggling the idea of pulling that 33 megahertz 386DX and throwing in a 25 or a 20 megahertz just for compatibility, because there are a lot of speed-sensitive games in this sort of early 90s 386 era. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Should I keep this CPU, or should I just throw in a 25 or a 20 megahertz and maybe that will help with compatibility? Or do you guys think it's already running just fine and I can pretty much get what I want from deturboing it or turning off the cache? Let me know. Any comments or questions about this machine? Overall, I am happy with it. It turned out pretty well, so I look forward to playing a lot of games on this build. So I will see you in the next video. If you like this kind of content, please ring the bell and subscribe. And again, make sure you comment. I love reading comments, even though I don't reply to all of them. I read every single comment you guys put down, and I love hearing old stories about machines that were similar to these builds that maybe you had when you were younger, or your experiences in the industry, and just things like that. I enjoy reading them, and I think other viewers enjoy reading that as well. And any technical information or tips or anything like that, be sure to throw that in there as well in the comment section, because even if maybe it's not useful to me, another viewer might come along and see it and be like really helpful to them. So anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.